So thank you very much for staying behind. I'm going to ask everyone on the panel to introduce themselves. My name is Speir, and the reason why we're involved is that we were approached, and ELOP's an LGBT mental health charity, and there was lots of resonance around the play in relation to thinking about mental health. So that's sort of the connection I'm chair of ELOP.
Hi, I'm Leah Rose. I recently did placement with ELOP, and I've just I heard about this opportunity, so I came here today to contribute. So hello.
Welcome. I'm Richard. I'm the director of the show.
Hi, my name's Daniel. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. And I'm here because I'm doing a master's and a PhD in bisexual studies, or bisexuality, broadly sociology, but yeah.
I'm Warwick. I'm a volunteer counsellor at ELOP, and I'm about to go into my third year of psychotherapy training, and I use he, him pronouns.
Thank you. I should have said my pronouns as she, her. What I'd really like to do is ask each of you initially just to kind of talk about what resonated for you in terms of the play, and then we're going to throw it out to the audience. So who would like to go first?
Well, amazing job, well done, and well done to the cast as well. It was really awesome. I really, really enjoyed it. I think something that I was particularly struck by and resonated with a lot in that is that there are 3 different kinds of masculinity on display in the performance, and 2 of them I relate to quite a lot in terms of queer masculinity and working class masculinity, and having to deal with the juxtaposition that comes with, you know, growing up in a working class background, but then being queer and how you navigate those spaces. Yeah, so it gave me a lot of food for thought, for sure.
Yeah, I think something that resonated with me definitely was the assault sections, because that is something I have personally experienced. I went through physical and sexual assaults when I was 17 and 18, and also in my early 30s, gay clubs, in street assaults and stuff like that. So that really resonated with me very, very deeply on a kind of a gut level. But I think on a, you know, high level, you know, just that whole thing of having, in the past, of having to mask my bisexuality and be one or the other. So that definitely resonated. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me as well, I think what resonated was how it's kind of like you're either gay or you're straight, that's it. You can't be in between, that's just not it. So it was just kind of like, even some of the characters were confused about like, oh, he's gay, oh, he's bi, and it's like, that kind of resonated with me, because even I thought when I was younger, no, I either have to be straight or I have to be gay. So to be able to kind of just relate to that and know other people kind of going through those things, it felt really nice.
Well, I've been thinking about the play for a long time, so lots resonated with me. I think in terms of this area and why I really wanted to get ELOP involved, is because I think it gives an opportunity to talk about something that I don't think a lot of us think about very much. I think bisexuality doesn't really, we don't get much spoken about, that LGBT acronym we hear all the time, but the B is actually quite silent often. And so I thought this was a really good opportunity to put that to the forefront of a conversation, but also in a way that that wasn't forcing anything on people or forcing a particular message on an audience. And I think that's a real strength of the play.
So it'd be really useful just to hear kind of your questions and anything that kind of resonated from you in relation to what you've just heard. There's a hand up there.
Hi. Awkward positioning, I'm sorry. Basically, the thing that really resonated for me the most, it was the different nuances in the masculinity tones of the toxic masculinity choice. I think that's something that I think we're very used to. I come from like a film background, and I think that we're very used to seeing like the jerk, and then you write it off as a jerk, and then that's it, and then you're kind of like it's very one-dimensional character. And I think that you, in a strange, very entertaining way, I think that you managed to do like the three characters that could have been very easily written off, like, oh, the jerk, the good one, and the weird one, or like whatever. But then within the time, they kind of all display into this kind of like dismembering of all the bits that, which trauma made them that toxic, that level of toxicity. What I'm sure you're aware of what you did. Anyway, what I really wanted to ask is, because of the political climate and everything that is going on, I find myself, it's very hard to pitch this sort of content right now because it's very nuanced, and I think that it's a lot of like, they're kind of bad, but they're also kind of good, and it gets to this point, and then at that point, it's a turn, so you have to really read it to understand. So I was just kind of wondering, what was your building process, and how was the actual pitching and getting the idea on board? Like, did you just decide to do your elevator pitch that was not going to be really fair to the characters and just carry on with that, or did you, since the beginning, set out to actually, I'm going to explain it since day one, what is important to us and all of that?
So for the benefit of those who didn't hear the question, it's just about in terms of how we present the characters in that, like how we present them as 3D and flawed, but also sometimes as well-rounded characters, I suppose, rather than necessarily as good and bad and evil. I think, again, one of the strengths of Matt's piece is that he does allow room for you to draw your own conclusions. So it's interesting that you're saying, well, they're kind of good, they're kind of bad. Actually, a lot of people have very strong opinions, and I'd be interested to hear what if someone else in the audience had a very strong, I completely sided with this person or not. But that's quite an interesting aspect of it. I do think that a lot of conversations around contemporary subjects, particularly about ideas, and in this sphere, if you're talking about having a bisexual character on stage where they are the victim of bullying for their sexuality and abuse, that it is often presented as the bisexual character is good, the non-bisexual character is bad. And I think that Matt did a lot to try and make an audience work to leave a theatre and try and resolve things for themselves rather than telling them what to think. And I think that's a very important piece. So that was always something that was at core in the script. And so when I was developing it with Matt, and then we were casting it and we were making it, it was all about trying to keep it balanced, to keep that question for you to work out for yourselves rather than for me to tell you what to think.
And I wonder how that resonated for the three of you watching the play in terms of your own identity, in terms of being bisexual and then seeing that.
I mean, the thing that struck me just now actually was it definitely reminded me of the modality of counselling I'm working within, which is transactional analysis. You have the drama triangle, so you have the victim, rescuer, and persecutor triangle. And I could definitely see that in that play there, And I find it very interesting how bisexuality is portrayed in the media, because I think sometimes it gets, very often is portrayed as this thing that is other, that is strange, that is weird. There's the expectation that, for us to live up to a certain image, something like that. And that was, I think the thing that really, the part of the play I found really powerful was the dream sequence at the beginning. I think that was just very, very nightmarish and gothic and so on. And, I always think it's interesting with that sort of thing where, that emphasis on people saying what they feel they should say rather than what they're really feeling. And sometimes I would rather people say what they're really feeling, even if it's offensive to me at the time, because then it's something to work with, you know, rather than masking what they feel, you know. Yeah.
Can I ask a question off the back of that? So, do you feel that in terms of presentation of bisexuality in the media, that that the lack of it, for want of a better phrase, like contributes to less people identifying as bisexual? Is that something that?
Yeah, I do, because I think it comes down to that thing. You know, there's still that pressure, which I've had from both sides. You know, that you're either gay or you're straight, and the B sometimes seems very, very silent or reduced in the LGBT thing. Yeah.
I think there's lots of discussion around, especially within like bisexual communities, around representation, what representation is and what it looks like. And, you know, often it's the case that bisexuality is heavily simplified, you know, in order to make it representation. So bisexuality, if we're thinking theoretically, is what we understand to be a fluid concept in the sense that sexualities are a fluid concept. So they change through the life course, identities change through life course, and, you know, bisexuality, someone's bisexuality is different to someone else's. My bisexuality is different to your bisexuality, for example. And so it becomes really difficult to understand or to try and create a bisexual character that represents every bisexual person in existence. It's impossible, you know. And then you get, you know, really lovey-dovey characters like Nick from Heartstopper, you know, as like this is the bisexual person. And so, yeah, that kind of like nuance seems to fall away because they're so, you know, they're so trying to create some things like, yeah, you know, representation is there. There's the bisexual, you know. So I really appreciated the much more nuanced and, I guess, complexified, if I can be an academic and make up words, approach to bisexuality, but to also, you know, different kinds of bisexuality. And I just hope that, you know, this bisexuality in this play, you're not trying to make it what bisexuality is in any way. It's just a representation rather than a representation.
It's just like off the back of what you say, if you were to talk to Matt, the writer, about this, he might also raise the idea of queer villainy, which he talks about in his introduction to the text, which you can buy upstairs. But he would talk about how growing up, you know, Disney and other films present villains as queer, and that androgyny contributes to their to their villainy, and then how this character almost takes on that trope in order to, or the bi character in this play would use that trope to his advantage in some way. Is that something that trope, is that something that you recognise from the production as well, or?
Yeah. I have no more to add.
Do you want to add anything before we ask it?
I think everybody's pretty much said like a lot of what I was thinking, but also I think like it's really based on experiences as well, and obviously adding on to like maybe intersectionality as well, of like being a black bi person and stuff. I think it's like a whole different world in like certain aspects and such, and I could really go on all day about it, but all night even, but yeah, it's really important just to think about all of that as well. Yeah.
One of the things that I was struck with, and it was a conversation that Dan and I had in the interval, was there was also part of an explanation that sometimes you don't get around bisexuality in terms of it within the play itself, which again I thought was, given you don't necessarily know who's going to be in the audience, was kind of quite helpful. And again, it wasn't about preaching, it was about offering up some kind of information and knowledge really. And I think particularly in relation to kind of biphobia, and sort of what people might have experienced, which I thought was, for me, again, quite interesting. And I wondered, kind of, again, for yourselves and your kind of lived experience about what resonated for you from that.
I think for me, something that came up for me as well was when I went into counselling myself. So I went into the psychotherapy, not as a student, but just to have counselling myself about 20 years ago. And the therapist I worked with for a long time, when I kind of said, because at that time I was still exploring my sexuality, and I kind of said, I think I'm bisexual, because I'd repressed it for a long time. And she said, don't label yourself, And I'm thinking, actually, no, you're labelling me now by saying I'm not bisexual, And things have changed a lot, I mean, it wouldn't be acceptable now for a therapist in a session for somebody to come along and say, I'm bisexual or asexual or gay or straight or whatever, and say you're not, But that's simply because that is the criteria that therapists work with at the moment, And the Timby character, who I thought was absolutely amazing, I found the scene where, towards the end, where, he's kind of on the edge of a breakdown and he's kind of rehearsing his lines of what to say. And again, it's this thing of, I think with all of this, what worries me is that, people will say what they think people want to hear, not what they really feel, and, these are, it's, like I said, bisexuality is a continuum, and, how I am compared to the people here, compared to, somebody I don't know, it's all completely different. But it's just the representation is so important, and not ideal. I think in some ways, idealisation is as bad as demonising people. They're two pillars that are inherently dangerous. Yeah.
I was curious to see if anyone else sided with Kasper at all. I was kind of like, yes, Kasper, you're a bit, maybe you're going a little too far, but yes. I feel like I was almost living vicariously through him, thinking back to my old childhood bullies in school. I'd be like, wow, if I could speak as eloquently as him.
Yeah, so this is, for those who haven't seen the production on the live stream, this is a character who takes it upon himself to end someone's university career out of spite, really, a lot, but also driven by genuine, genuinely damaged. Yes.
Yeah. Did anyone else kind of agree with Kasper at all?
I feel like his anger was really relatable.
Yes.
And that was really exciting to see, but then I got scared because I was so with him.
Yeah.
And at the end, when we saw him sort of sat against the table, as Timby was stood by the door, and I was like, oh, you can see the guilt now, and that kind of settling in, and that was really moving, I found.
Absolutely agree.
There's a moment where bisexuality is defined in the play, which is, it's not a clear-cut definition necessarily, but that has also sparked a couple of people coming up to me and saying, well, that's not necessarily the definition that I would use for bisexuality. And that's definitely something we knew going into the show, but the character who gives that definition might not necessarily be confident in that, in uses language. He defines it as someone who likes both genders, which I think is the contentious part. But what was your? But then I think if your bisexuality is different to somebody else's, that can also, gender can come into that too. So I'd be interested in hearing someone's response to that definition.
So, this is such a difficult thing when you're doing research, because you have to define the group of people that you're going to research, you know. And in doing so, you kind of have to answer that question of, you know, what is bisexuality? So actually, I kind of get around it a little bit because I use the term plurisexuality, well, plurisexualities, which are, you know, it kind of encompasses as an umbrella term identities or sexualities that are, you know, attracted to two or more genders. So that includes bisexuality and pansexuality, demisexuality, ace people, and, you know, all the complexities that come with that. So I kind of take a very broad stroke, and I think you'd also find that the majority of bi people tend not to define in the way that it's defined in the show, but I think that was kind of important in a way because it demonstrates the, I guess, lack of understanding of bisexuality, which is important to recognize, especially in the context of the discussion they were having at the time, which was, you know, well-being support for bi people, where, you know, so often people have mentioned that it's so poor.
I was wondering about the kind of the political context, given the political context that we are in now, what it's been like over the last sort of couple of years and kind of ramping up probably in the next year, and what that kind of, how you think that kind of was portrayed in the play, but also thinking about the impact of that around bisexuality and mental health.
Political context in what way?
The wider political context, I suppose, of sort of the comments that are being made currently by political leaders, or the lack of standing up for the community in general, but what that means for people who identify along that kind of bisexual kind of continuum.
Yeah, I think, so trans people exist, and trans rights are human rights, fundamental. I think that, at least in the conversations I've had with my friends and with my colleagues, that there's a good amount of commonality between, you know, trans existences and bisexuality. Although you can argue that both are equally misunderstood in many, many ways. But there is that kind of fluidity that I was talking about before that becomes so kind of misunderstood when we try to simplify things under labels and try to categorize things into boxes, you know. So I think, you know, the political landscape are using queer people in general as political pawns, and that's very sad. However, I'm really interested in radical affordances in spite of that. So a lot of my work focuses on how are people creating communities, sharing resources, building understanding of their plurisexualities or their bisexualities, pansexualities, whatever, in spite of this. And that is really empowering as well, because you remember that, you know, in the face of all of this, we have power and we can utilize what we have to resist.
And that seems to kind of resonate to some degree with Kasper and what Kasper was doing.
Yeah.
So there is also hope alongside the potential pessimism as well, but there's also hope there. Yeah. And I mean, that's a general question for all of you about kind of where you see that, and anybody else here as well.
Kasper's definitely an activist. So I think there's a dream sequence right in the middle which divides opinion, because in theory, I suppose you could cut it for the story to make sense and you wouldn't lose anything as far as the story needs. But I think your motivation, that Kasper's motivation and what is going on in his head, what's driving this person who you haven't really heard much of until just before the interval, would be missing. And I think historical mistreatment of homosexuals and of non-straight people, I think, is fundamental to what is driving him. And so I think in some ways, you mentioned the political context. Like, this show was actually meant to be done 4 years ago in March 2020, or nearly 4 years ago, March 2020, and then it got cancelled just before we met an audience. But in some ways, it's just got more relevant. And universities are pressure cookers for lots of different debates, and you'll often see them in the news, like a host of different subjects. You mentioned trans rights, for example. So yeah, I think it's fertile ground for a production to explore.
Also, I think, hasn't this year been labelled like the year of the bisexual man by some sort of queer newspaper? There you go.
Great, sounds good. But again, I think that's really interesting. But having that kind of thing from a newspaper, it's making it more political, but at what cost? And yeah. But I think I think I know with my experience of bisexuality that I can kind of go back in my life and trace things from when I was very, very young, okay, and think, oh yeah, there's a little sign there, little sign there, little sign there, okay. But then you've got all the pressure from society to conform to a certain way, And, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I was made to almost forget I'm bisexual sometimes. Like I choose to sometimes, I feel like sometimes I ignore the things around me, and I think maybe it's also because at some cases I may be in a relationship with a woman, or at some cases I may be in a relationship with a man, and depending on that, that's what I feel like matters. So if I'm with a woman, that's when I start to become a bit more political and a bit more stronger. But I feel like people around me also, like family-wise, friends-wise, my sexuality gets ignored after a while. It's like, well, you're with a guy now, so you might as well just class yourself as straight. Like, why did you got to do all of this? I went to Pride this year for the first time, and my family were kind of just like, why you got to do this? Like, why are you going to do this? You're not like a part of this or anything. And it's just like, people just, it's frustrating. It really is.
A little bit of history, actually. Bisexual people were at the first Pride, and there were a group of people who were specifically trying to, or a group of bisexual activists who were making sure that bisexual people were there at Pride, and that bisexuality was included in, LGBTQ that we know now. Before it was just lesbian and gay march, I think. Yeah.
So I think we're nearly out of time, but I did want to ask off the back of this, what you both said. Do you feel that from within the queer community there's that biphobia, that distrust of bisexuality as well?
Yeah.
I was going to complexify that a little bit. I don't know necessarily, just from my own personal encounters, I've always felt more comfortable in queer spaces than in straight spaces. And I've had conversations with straight women, for example, about bisexuality and being a man and being bisexual, and it's come off really uncomfortably, where I've been, subjected to biphobia in micro doses, which was not fun. So I always find, and I always highly recommend, if it's possible, to try and find a group of queer, amazing radical people. But the way I do that is by, and I understand that I'm a white man, so I'm able to be a lot more confident about it. But I do speak about being bisexual all the time, and I've realised how many more people around me are bisexual just because of that.
Interesting.
So, I have a group of friends in Bristol, and we were actually just sat around the pub, around the table of the pub, and I was talking about bisexuality, and then it was almost like one by one around the table. Everyone was like, yeah, I remember that experience, you know, and oh, I had this time, and yeah, I'm bi, you know, and it feels great, and it feels incredibly empowering.
And that feels like a really kind of something about sort of being seen and being known, how good that is for your mental health. And having those connections with others make a real difference for people's mental health. And you were going to say something.
Just adding as well, I think it depends if you're like a woman or a man, because being a bi woman, it's like with straight guys and stuff, especially, it's fetishized and stuff. It's like, oh wow, yeah, cool, we like that, we're into that. So it's kind of like the straight side are kind of okay with it, they accept it, they just see it as something like kinky or something cool or something trendy. So it's like, I feel like women can get away with it a little bit more. And yeah, and then when I see it on the other side for like men and such, it's just a whole different thing. It's a whole different experience for them. And yeah, I just find that quite interesting as well. Yeah.
Something I find, just my personal experience, is the way I relate to women who I'm attracted to, okay, is I really get bothered by, you know, I mean, I hear this all the time. I'm from Essex, by the way, okay, and you know, some of the various stereotypes about Essex, you know, do sometimes crystallise and become true, you know, and you do get a thing where, you know, people can come across as very predatory in their language and things like that. The way I think I relate to women is very sensitive and so on, you know, and I tend, if in a relationship with a woman, I tend to prefer her to take the lead and so on, okay? You know, so yeah, I can relate to this thing about it being fetishized for women, and for guys it's, you know, again, it's a different complexity, but still a challenge for everybody, yeah.
And just sort of what you've really talked about is also the context. It's where you are in your life and who else is around you that really can make a difference. And just also how you're seen can be different about whether at the time who you are in a relationship with. And that can either, in some ways, strengthen how people see you in terms of being bisexual, or it could become more hidden, not because of you, but kind of because of society.
Yeah, absolutely.
And if anyone has a book they want to read, Shiri Eisner's Notes on a Bisexual Revolution is phenomenal, and talks about that exactly, and about mononormativity, which is a whole thing that you can go and read.
I think there's
Great.
one question over there, and then we're going to probably have to stop. Is that right? Well, you're telling us we have to wrap up. We have to wrap up. Can I just thank you all for staying? Can I thank the panel? And very much Richard for directing the play and giving us such a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.